Good afternoon, colleagues, and a very warm welcome to day 2 of our Research in Distance Education Conference, Learning Through Disruption. My name is Craig O'Callaghan, and I am the Chief Operating Officer for the University of London Worldwide and the Deputy Chief Executive. Today, taking a focused approach across the 3 days of the conference, we're exploring the innovation, developments, challenges, and looking to the future of learning through this pandemic. Yesterday, in our first day of the conference, we explored student experience and student engagement. Today, we turn our attention to assessment, and particularly we focus on redesigning assessment for a digital world. At the University of London, with over 50,000 students distributed across the globe and delivering effective distant learning at a distance, we were able to adapt to the lockdowns that spread across continents and continue to deliver our high-quality learning experience to students in our global classroom. But we had to make very significant changes to our approach to assessment, moving our examinations online for the summer of 2020. Now, a year later, we see that across the HE sector, digital assessment has firmly taken root. Today, in our keynote and parallel sessions, we'll focus on the assessment pivot and ask ourselves how inclusive, authentic assessment is and can be. And we will tackle some of the challenges we all face in securing the rigor of our assessment and our awards. And we encourage your engagement, questions, and sharing of good practice. At the end of our program today, will help us to bridge day 3 with a very exciting program of invited speakers. Industry leader, short course provider called Sarah, will be represented by Betty van den Bosch, their Chief Content Officer. And our own Director of Online Education, Sam Brenton, will close our day with a session that questions the consensus in pedagogy. This will, I'm sure, prepare us to dive into rethinking learning and teaching tomorrow morning. I'm delighted now to introduce our keynote presenters for this afternoon and to welcome our respondent. Our keynote presenters are Dr. Linda Amrane-Cooper, Director of Strategic Projects and Head of the University of London's Centre for Distance Education. Our co-presenters are Professor Stylianos, Hatzipanagos, and Professor Alan Tait, our CD leads for research and dissemination. Stylianos' expertise is in technology-enhanced learning, research-informed innovation of academic practice, and doctoral postdoctorate education management. His research and scholarship portfolio includes learning design and evaluation of online learning environments, formative and technology-enhanced assessment, computer-supported collaborative work, flexible and distance education, digital literacies, and social media and social networks in the education context. Alan is Emeritus Professor of Distance Education and Development at the Open University UK, and has a long and illustrious track record of practice and publication. From 2013 to 2015, he was Director of International Development and Teacher Education, and before that was Pro Vice Chancellor Academic at the Open University UK from 2007 to 2012. And from 2004 to 2007 was the Dean of the Faculty of Education and Language Studies. Our respondent for this keynote is Dr. Monica Ward, and a very warm welcome to you, Monica. And she's from Dublin City University. Monica is the Assistant Head for Teaching Excellence in the School of Computing at Dublin City University. She has extensive experience in teaching and assessment a range of subjects, from technical to transversal skills. She's a champion of the use of technology in education, and she advocates a co-creation and culturally responsive approach with academics and students. So a very warm welcome to our keynote team and to Monica. And now hand over to Linda and Stylianos for moving over to moving assessment online at scale. And I hope you all enjoy today's second day of the conference.
Thank you very much, Craig, and thanks for that warm welcome. Welcome my panel and to Monica. I'm going to share my screen and then hand over to Stylianos.
Good afternoon, everybody. I will start with giving you an idea about the structure of the talk. So we'll start with talking about the theoretical background, covering some underpinning issues that drove this research. And then we are going to talk about the study on which we are focusing on, the evaluative study. We'll talk about aims and methodology, and then we'll report on 3 important areas: the student voice, the examiner's feedback, and the program director views. And we'll touch on a conceptual framework for supporting students to succeed in assessment, which was the outcome of the research as well. And we will finish with some conclusions from the evaluation and reflections on assessment. So in terms of what research says about online assessment. Interestingly, while we were doing this investigation, by classifying all the big number of references we encountered on online assessment, we had to differentiate between research and outcomes that were focusing on the era pre-COVID, pre-pandemic, but also we found an important number of references that had to do with online assessment post-pandemic, and some data as well, which contributed to a theoretical background in relation to this evaluation study. So the four key areas, the first one was about what students want. And pre and post-pandemic research has indicated that most students want to go through online assessment rather than a paper and pencil one. Looking at the motivations, I think an important motivation has to do with timely feedback and timely results, because this seems to be, of course, an important aspect of the learning process. The second area we looked at some issues, some problem areas that the research has identified in relation to online assessment. And the first one had to do with equity of access. So the research had identified some key prerequisites to allow equity in online assessment. An important one had to do with developing technology skills and digital competencies, and also access to networks and technology. Of course, a key issue is how to create pedagogically valid assessment formats, and the competencies and the digital skills affected not only students but staff. Regarding impact on performance, because we're very much interested in looking at how others approach this problem of impact on performance, the impact on online assessment on performance. So pre-pandemic, we don't think that there is consistent view in relation to positive or negative impact of move to online assessment on performance. Some researchers have identified pre-pandemic an overall drop in student performance when compared to paper-based scores. Post-pandemic, another situation. For instance, I will refer to some data given by HISA, and there seems to be a percentage that a percentage of students achieving a first or good degree has increased by 6 to 7 percentage points. And of course, coronavirus, the relation of coronavirus and higher education is an important area to focus on. Research had identified that coronavirus represents a perfect storm for academic offenses. So this has to do with things like essay meals, contract cheating, but on balance, from the research we looked at, the pandemic's influence on integrity is more positive than negative. Some academic integrity experts claim that online assessment may reduce the incidence of cheating and plagiarism among students, while others praise the capacity and technological affordances of remote invigilation technology proctoring systems. Overall, understandably, academic offenses is a very complex problem in traditional setups, and of course continues to be a very complex problem in online settings. So just to give you, before we talk about the findings, to give you a brief context about this evaluation. In late March 2020, more than a year ago, the university communicated to all students that examinations in 2020 will have to move online, as conventional examinations in examination centers will not be possible due to the pandemic restrictions. So to give you an idea of the numbers, 38,000 students were registered to take over 100,000 exams in the summer of 2020 across 23 time zones. The senior leadership team of the University of London Worldwide asked the Centre for Distance Education to undertake a detailed evaluation of the online timed assessments that took place between May and August 2020. So the purpose of the evaluation was beyond providing a detailed evaluation of what really happened, identifying the experiences of key stakeholder groups. And by stakeholder groups, I'm talking about primarily the students, but also the examiners whose task was to mark these exams, the program directors whose task was to put these exams, to design these exams, and also revisit the format of assessments in the programs. And also we looked at other things and other literature like regulations and frameworks that advise us about conditions of these examinations at the University of London. Another objective was to identify implications for the future of digital assessments and University of London, and this would lead to supporting preparation for the summer 2021 assessment. So there were four key areas of investigation having to do with student behaviors. Procedural, in the sense that we're interested in the exam uptake, patterns of usage in the VLE, issues around proctoring, submission of answers. I must add here that there were basically two big categories of online exams. The first one was with the dominant one, had to do with online open book exams returned via the VLE within a prescribed time. The submission window varied from 1 hour to 7 days, so it was quite wide, quite variable. And the second category, which was only used by a very small number of programs, had to do with digitally proctored exams taken on an enterprise solution platform. The second area of investigation had to do with the student sentiment. There was a survey, quantitative and qualitative, which had qualitative aspects, that was sent to 38,000 students, and we had quite a good return of 29.5%. Also, this survey was sent out before marks confirmed for obvious reasons. We also conducted interviews, qualitative interviews with the students. There were 22 interviews, 14 undergraduates and 40 postgraduate students participated in these qualitative interviews, were helped as well, very important, very valuable, but by student research fellows at the Center of Distance Education. The other key area had to do with the student outcome, average marks across 4 years, distribution of awards, and also there were operational issues. That's where we talked to 621 examiners by sending them a survey, and which they had to fill, and we had a very good return of 27%. Also, as I mentioned, we talked to program directors, we talked to 12 program directors across the university. The other things we looked in terms of demographics, and Linda will give you an idea of that as well. We were interested in location, program, module, gender, age, and also special arrangements, very important for this type of exam.
Thanks for setting the scene there, Stylianos. So in our study then, we were looking at the impact of the move to digital assessment, and I'm going to focus here on the students and just summarize some of our results. So I think the very first thing that was positive really in what we found is that more students took more of their exams than they would have done in previous years, where they would have traveled to an exam center and sat in a room and taken a pen and paper exam. So about 93% of exam events took place. And I think that across the sector, this was the case, that students have moved and taken online assessments very successfully. And that was very reassuring for everybody involved. With our students in so many locations, it was also really important to understand if there were local barriers. And although there were issues with access to Wi-Fi and so on, overall, students in all locations were able to engage with our examinations, which again is a fantastic outcome. We had a question in our survey, which Stylianos has talked about, which indicated that 79% of the students were able to demonstrate their learning through online assessment. What we do know, though, from the feedback that students gave us in these varieties of formats, is that some students were not fully equipped to engage with the format and requirements of their exams. And so this meant there were implications for training. A couple of things I'd highlight there are, in particular, and Stylianos indicated that we had a variety of open book type exams, and the length of those exams varied quite considerably. So some students had a fixed small number of hours in which to submit their answers, and others had a longer window, 24 hours or 48 hours. And that for some students, having a longer window such as 24 hours was actually quite stressful, that they weren't sure, were they supposed to be writing for that full 24 hours? And I know from talking to other colleagues at other institutions that that was a similar issue. Of course, the 24 hours allowed for people to access and take a break where they needed to, and so on. So pros and cons there. I think not surprisingly, there was room for enhanced communication. I mean, we were all suddenly working from our kitchen tables, working from home. Our students were invariably in lockdown themselves. And this was all pretty new and pretty fast happening for us. So enhanced communications were highlighted as an issue. We did move the timing of the exams last summer, and that did have some negative impacts on students who were then waiting for results and ready to register for the following year, or perhaps who wanted to go into employment in terms of when their degree award was issued. And we recognise that that was there. And then assessment offences, the referrals for this also delayed and impacted marks and re-enrolment, for example. So there was overall some increase in assessment offences, which we've seen in other organisations. Just to say, in terms of the demographics of our respondents, we were delighted in the sample of the survey sample to really capture what we believe is an authentic representation of the student voice. So we had, a very good age distribution that matches our age distribution of students, gender, and mode of study, whether students were working in teaching centres or were studying online with us independently. There were fewer postgraduate students responding, but that is partly because not all postgraduate students were being assessed by examination last summer. Many of them would have had coursework, and so they weren't so readily represented in that sample. So overall, positive impacts on students, but some areas for enhancement. If we look at what the examiner's survey said, and I wanted to particularly focus here on student performance compared to previous years, we asked our examiners, and we're talking here of about 400 colleagues, and we had a very good response rate to this. We asked them whether they felt that students had been able to achieve higher academic standards in their work in comparison to previous years. And you'll see that about 50% of the examiners felt that students had achieved higher work, higher levels of standards. And then about 30% felt that it made no difference this year in comparison to last year. I think that was important because not only did we want to ensure that students could access their examinations, we also wanted to ensure that students were able to demonstrate their learning through the examination. So we got the feedback from the students themselves. 79% said they could demonstrate their learning, and here overall only a few of the examiners who were marking these exams felt that it made no difference or that they were unsure. So I think overall a positive outcome there. We then spent some time talking to our program directors across the large number of exams and the large number of programs that were assessed through the online timed assessments last summer. And really interesting views there, and I think very much the views that are kind of reflected across the sector now. So I'll just share with you some of those ideas really. I think we're all aware of kind of workload and support concerns when we were changing assessment, working in the new digital spaces, having a virtual learning environment that would allow examiners and course teams to access and engage with, as well as allowing students to access and engage with their online timed assessments. At the point where we were doing interviews, which is in the autumn of last year, there was a variety of views about whether online assessment would be part of the future. And certainly there was a point in the autumn where the University of London was thinking that we might be able to go back to exam centres, but clearly things have moved on since then. What we were talking about here, of course, is just end of study period exams. We weren't talking here about coursework. This evaluation was particularly focusing on what would have been timed examinations in an exam hall. But there's no doubt that it's moved thinking forward quite substantially around end of module assessment pedagogy, and moves to alternative forms of assessment. Coursework type assessment that is beginning to complement or replace examinations. And it seems definitely to have motivated staff to take a close look at what the meaning of assessment is for their programme and for their modules. One of the things that we used the evaluation for was to really inform planning for this summer. And of course, this summer, we're almost drawing to an end now with our online timed assessments. So they've been online again this year, as they have in most places. And we use the evaluation data and reports and conclusions with a really wide range of stakeholders through our governance committees, working with the programme directors and the teams, working with the examiners, etc. And there's a huge amount of development and innovation that's gone on since then, and I can't really report on all of it, but I thought I might try and categorise here, as we've done with the team, in terms of the areas that we've been thinking about. So I talked before about issues in terms of behaviours, digital behaviours for examinations. So really helping students to understand, what do you do with a 24-hour exam? Are you supposed to be sitting there typing around for 24 hours? How do you manage your own time and your interaction with the exam platform in that time? Also developing, the resources, the training, the understanding, the education and the commitment to assessment integrity, developing our regulations to take into account a digital platform and the opportunities that presents in terms of the kind of interaction between students that might be a problem. That's the timer, sorry, so I need to stop now. And we've thought quite a lot about how we ensure that all of our students are able to be assessed. And inevitably, there's been considerable work by our teams in enhancing the technology. So in conclusion then, from the evaluation study, before I just hand over to Alan, students were able to engage. The exam delivery parameters continue to vary to support engagement. support for well-being and access is very important. The design for and the training for and support for students to understand the importance of academic integrity is there. And we're really rethinking learning outcomes for modules and qualifications in different ways. Alan, over to you for the reflection on assessment and what the future holds.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you, both of you. So this concluding slide is more speculative, and indeed you might find it more polemical. And it's a summary of the sorts of big issues we think come out of the research as a whole. So first of all, this COVID crisis, which has been a crisis for higher education in this country as well as in others, has, we think, forced a rethink of assessment pedagogy. Instead of regarding assessment and in particular final examinations as part of the natural landscape that you don't even look at, it suddenly made people think, why do we have examinations? How do they link to assessment as a whole? And how does that link to our learning and teaching strategy? So we think we're not by any means at the end of this rethink of assessment pedagogy. In fact, we're rather at the beginning. This crisis, which has been challenging and tragic, of course, has also, we think, is going to have some creative outcomes, in particular in this field. There have been some particular problems with the way in which it's been managed over the last 12 months, in particular around issues of identity and academic integrity. So there is evidence that some students, a minority of students, have abused academic integrity, and there are two broad responses to those, and we think the balance between that is going to change, and we think, to be polemical, it should change. So there's a kind of disciplinary response, which is let's bring in more technology to check identity, let's bring in proctoring to look at what students are doing in their homes. Actually quite a pushback against proctoring, in particular by some students, which we uncovered in our project. But there's a kind of disciplinary approach, which can't be done away with altogether. It's going to be part of the future. But more creatively, there's the need to rethink the design of assessment to support academic integrity. In other words, if we bring in this term authentic assessment, if for example we accept that students live in a world of multiple digital resources which they have to evaluate, why do we invent assessment processes that pretend that they don't? So we think learning design for assessment is at least as important, perhaps more important, than the disciplinary approach of identity control and proctoring, although we accept that both are going to be part of the future. We've looked into the literature over the last 6 months in particular, 9 months in particular, and there's a lot of voices calling for a rethink about online examinations and in particular exams as a form of end of course assessment. Let's look with more urgency at alternative forms of assessment, more challenging in the distance and online world, we accept that, but projects, performance-related assessment, continuous assessment, those universities which have managed the crisis over the last year in assessment in particular most effectively have those who had the most developed forms of continuous assessment, which wasn't so challenged by the crisis of bringing people together in one place to sit unseen examinations. And in that way, we think we can support the move towards more authenticity and support employability. So we think that there's a range of positive things which are going to come out of rethinking whether examinations at the end of a course are the best way to support learning as well as to assess performance. Now we know that there's going to be online exams again this year, 2021, and we suspect in 2022, we think it's very unlikely, and indeed we would certainly not advocate for a return once this COVID pandemic is under control, a return to 2019. We don't think that's either possible or desirable. And we listened to a number of, in our student interviews, a number of students saying how much time they'd saved in traveling, how much being able to sit examinations at home had saved them stress and money and allowed flexibility to their lives. Although we recognise that for some professional purposes, in particular, some particular degree tracks, professional bodies still demand unseen examinations, but we don't think that's going to hold up forever. Nonetheless, there are tensions around the move for simple examinations as the main focus of assessment. But we accept also that if the paradigms in assessment are going to change, as we think they should, as this crisis has revealed that they must, there are significant implications for workload management. Academic staff and professional staff have both been under a huge amount of strain over the last 12 months trying to manage in a crisis, and university management is going to have to look at how workload, if, for example, more continuous assessment is brought in where it doesn't exist, how that's going to be managed. And equally, that academic and professional staff are supported professionally in managing these new wider ranges of forms of assessment, which focus on learning as much, if not more, than the judgment of performance for the outside world. So in a nutshell, we think this crisis will have some positive effects in rethinking how assessment supports learning, in rethinking authentic assessment. And we think part of that for the future would include digital and online forms of assessment. So I think that brings this set of slides to an end. I'm looking to Linda for a nod, unless you want the word.
Yes.
Yeah.
The
Okay.
last one is just our references.
Our references, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll conclude there and hand over, I think, to our chair.
Over to Monica.
Okay, hi, thanks very much. That was very informative, and it's a really nice piece of work because you've a large number of students and you've also good coverage from the academics, which is great. So there's a lot kind of to unpack there, but a few things that kind of stood out for me. So you had only one line there, but I mean, it could be nearly an entire conference itself on the pedagogically valid assessments. Like, it's a really complex topic, and you know, it was there as one of your points, but I mean, it's kind of probably one of the most challenging parts of this whole thing. And I also like the fact that you picked out staff competences, because like, while I suppose a lot of people here at the conference are sort of in the pedagogical and assessment space, like not every colleague in every discipline is the same kind of keen interest in it. So it's to sort of recognize that staff are at different places in terms of their learnings there, and to kind of deal with that. You mentioned about the impact on student performance and about the increase in student performance. And I would say here in DCU, at least in my university, we've had the same experience, that the performance has generally increased. Now, we could have a kind of a ding-dong fight about why that was. And there are, you know, possibly some of it due to academic integrity issues. But I would sort of take some positive aspects as well. If the assessment is maybe slightly less stressful, or if it's open book, that they don't have to do memorizing, and you're testing different skills. So I wouldn't kind of view it in a, they were all cheating and that's why they all increase. So I think it's kind of it's a complex thing. I was interested to see that you kind of said that they would reduce in the incidence of academic offences. And I mean, it's probably a longer conversation, but it was an interesting observation. I would think for some colleagues, it's actually easier to spot because of the online nature and, you know, things around that. So again, I think it's kind of a complex topic, and it's one that would be good to keep an eye on, because I think the kind of the view of the person in the street would be, oh, it all went through the roof, right? I was interested in your submission time piece. So and your terminology. So we had a big bun fight internally about what we were going to call these, you know, synchronous online assessment, you know, longer synchronized exam, take-home exam, and we'd all these different names for it. So, but I liked your short, medium, and long. I mean, it was very simple. And it was nice, Linda, that you pointed out that the students need guidance. So if you give them 24 hours, like, we as academics think we're giving you time to think about it and pull together a piece of work or report or whatever, where the student, oh, I can't eat or drink or sleep for 24 hours. So I suppose it's highlighted the need for guidance, which you have mentioned as well. One thing, I mean, it might be useful to hear from you, but so I think a lot of it is discipline specific. So for example, a lot of colleagues in the business school, they would do longer take-home exams, kind of case studies or whatever. So, but in other disciplines, they preferred that kind of short, synchronized online exams. So I think there might be kind of interesting findings to kind of look there. Also about the students, how do they approach the exam? It would be good to have information. So we were highly encouraging our staff to provide mock exams in the same format. So if it was, a synchronous online exam that had a different style of question than the normal exam, at least give the students at least one sample question of what it would look like and how they were to upload stuff, or whether it was inline text, whether it was a report, whatever it was, just to kind of lower their kind of anxiety levels. I have to say, I'm really impressed that you were across 23 time zones. That's some logistical thing to have to deal with, so that was very impressive. I was interested in what you said about the examiner's opinion. So I think our colleagues over here would kind of agree with that in terms of, had their marks gone up and down, were they affected? I think that was, so it's good to see kind of a lot of commonality across that. And again, with the program directors, I'd say they're broadly similar. And one thing I'm kind of very conscious here is, and I'd like to kind of see your opinion again on this. So I get the kind of the module, depending on the nature of the module, how you assess that and all that. So it's the kind of the skill versus knowledge modules. So it's kind of easier to do the knowledge ones, whereas the skill ones, like, mathematics, or in my case, programming, it's slightly different than doing a case study. So I think it'd be good to kind of look out for kind of divergent opinions on that one. When you were talking about kind of the support for students, so some of the feedback that we got here was that it was actually better for students who had some disabilities, because it was more inclusive, so they could use their own laptop with their own software and they knew it would work. So whereas sometimes they have to go to a special room with some other laptop and they might be worried that it wouldn't have their assistive technology there. So again, I'm always looking out for the silver lining in those clouds, So in terms of the reflections, I agree with many of the points that you had there. And I really think we should grasp this opportunity to change the perception of assessment. We're lucky here in DCU that we tend to have a high proportion of continuous assessment. So maybe I hadn't thought of it before, Ellen, but maybe that took out some of the sting, although it was very stingy, the whole process. And I'm a really big advocate of authentic assessment. And I think it's mad myself that colleagues in their programming exams, as you say, like, you're never going to be asked to write a computer program without access to, an editor, the syntax of somebody else's and whatever. So it seems a bit mad to me, but and I was kind of initially confused when you were talking about the disciplinary approach. So you were talking about disciplinary as a rap on the knuckles, and I was thinking of different disciplines reacting in the same way, and how they were phrasing their questions. So I thought it works from both lenses, right? In terms of proctoring, I know students, as you say, Stylianos, students don't like them. I wouldn't like, so I wouldn't cheat, I'm very good. But, just the idea that somebody watching me all the time and have to blow my nose or whatever, just, so I really think the answer, not all cases, but in many cases, is smarter assessment. And, as you have already said, that the professional developer staff is really important. And like, I don't think staff should feel that they should know all of this in advance. It's okay if you don't know it, but kind of accept that we're all learning. I think it's for the staff, what I think is that it's really important to have good guidelines and avoid information overload. So I don't know what it was like in your world, but our staff are just getting information loads of times, 25 pages of something from one place and then something from another. So, and I think and I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this. I think that clear domain relevant examples of what questions should look like is really important. So like the business people can see what is a good question in the business area and whatever. But overall, I thought it was, your findings there are quite positive. They could have been quite, oh, it all went pear-shaped and the students couldn't do anything and the teachers thought they all cheated and whatever. But, I think it's a really solid piece of work. So I want to thank you for that. And before I give you a chance to respond, I just want to see, does anybody have any questions that they would like to ask?
There are a few questions in the Q&A area.
Okay, yeah, sorry,
Monica,
I see them there.
I'm happy to start to
Yes, if you start,
address
Linda,
those,
yeah.
if that's okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a question from Dr. T about what do we mean by enhanced communication? So in the run-up from March to the start of our online timed assessment, we weren't always getting the messages out as clearly as we would hope to have done, or as quickly as we would hope to have done to our students. That was the reality of what was, you know, now we're used to the pandemic, I think, but if we think back to certainly in the UK in March, it was difficult to know anything of what was going to happen in the future, and it was a very disturbing time, I think, for students and staff. So I think that our communications weren't as clear. What we've seen this year with our run up to exams and delivery of our exams has been a much better set of communication with students. So it was just that backwards and forwards with 38,000 students doing exams in 23 zones, over 110,000 examinations. There were a lot of communications that we need to get right. There's a question here, and I love this question. Thanks very much for the informative assessment. When do you expect a change in assessment? The changes in assessment are likely to be implemented? Forever is my answer. We will be changing assessment forever, as far as I can tell. And I think that's one of the silver linings, you know, that Alan sort of mentioned there, that we really are, all of us, I think, are grappling with how we can improve the effectiveness and meaningfulness and tie into authenticity and employability, and picking up on Monica's, you know, kind words there around, you know, meaningfulness of examination. So I do think that that's going to happen, you know, onwards.
I'm just conscious of time as well. So Stylianos, did you want to come there in? Unmute, Stylianos.
You're on mute there, Stilly.
I'm sure
sorry,
it's wonderful.
I'm muted. Yeah. Yes, in relation to this question and when these changes are happening, as to complement Linda's answer, I think the changes have happened already, and there were very positive changes as far as the redesigning assessment. The question is whether post-pandemic institutions will see it as a perfect timing to go back to pre-pandemic practices in relation to assessment. My view is that probably they won't, because evaluation has shown the advantages of moving to online assessment, and there is a strong push from a student body that want online assessment to remain, and these changes to remain. Somebody else asked about the difference between distance learning and campus-based exams, and I don't think there is a big difference. I think the commonality that points towards the right solution is that exams, when they exist, if they are necessary, are part of a continuous assessment that the students need to engage with. They are not isolated incidents in the end of somebody's student journey.
Okay, yeah, Grant. So is there any other questions that you want to pick up on their panel before we finish off? So
I'll just say something about online proctoring, Monica, yes, if I may. So somebody asks for more details about student pushback. There was one program, I think which program it was, it should perhaps remain confidential, but there was one program by one of the London universities where the students simply said, "We're not doing it. We don't accept it. We're not having it. It's intrusive." And I think the 12 months gone has seen the kind of technical solution which online proctoring has been promoted as by the companies who are producing systems. The solution to academic integrity for online assessment be challenged by so many ethical questions that I think it must be an open, I'd be interested to know, we don't have the time now, Monica, but I'd be interested to know what other colleagues think. I think it must be an open question as to whether online proctoring is going to be a big part of the solution for the future.
Yeah, okay. I'd say we could stay talking here forever, and we won't be able to answer all the questions. So thanks to everybody who put in questions there. Linda, did you just want to lead out into the next session. Yeah, you're on mute, Linda. Sorry.
Okay, thanks, Monica. I do hope that the day will come when the technology can work out that I'm on mute and switch it off for me. So thank you very much to my colleagues and to Craig for introducing us, and to Monica. We now leave here, have a short break, and we have 3 parallel sessions, which I hope you'll engage with us. They're all about assessment, digital assessment. So you know, there's more opportunity to discuss many of these issues, and in fact, Alan is in one session, and I'm myself in another session. So there's a lot happening this afternoon, and then later on we have our invited talks that Craig already mentioned. So we've got a full afternoon here. Hope you'll continue to stay with us. Just click on the links at the time when the sessions opens, and we'll see you in our parallel sessions. Thank you very much, everybody.